yesterday. The story was about Rebbe, let's see, it was about Rebbe Zeira, who had made Aliyah, and he went yesterday. Rebbe, let's see, it was about Rebbe Zeira, who had made Aliyah, and he went. It's one of the mysteries of life, Hal. I can't tell you what.
Didn't used to be.
I know, it's strange. I don't know why it does that. Okay, Katsalik Lahacha. So when he made Aliyah, Azal Akizdam, he went for a bloodletting. Azal boy mizbon chada litra de kupad min tabacha. So what do you do when you do a bloodletting? You have to. It's healthy to have a piece of meat to be able to replenish your iron, your red blood cells. I don't know how much of it they knew, but they knew that eating meat was the right thing to do after you do a bloodletting. So Azal boy mizbon chada litra de kupad min tabcha. So he goes to the butcher to buy a litra. So maybe let's say it's around a pound. We don't know exactly how much it was. So Amar lei bekama hadin litrasa. He said, how much is this pound of meat? Amar lei bechamshin mani v'chad kursam. He said 50 mana and one slap on the face. Okay, or one zetz, you know. So Amar lei savli shitin v'lo kabiluluye. I'll give you 60 without the slap. And the butcher refused to accept. And like we saw in the story, Reb Zera kept going up in the price, kept offering more and more money, and the guy simply just refused. So finally, Reb Zera said, and this is where we're up to in the story, Avid kimin hagach, go ahead and do whatever your minhag is. I'll pay you the 50, and whatever if you feel you got to slap me, slap me. So birum shenachis lebeis va'ada. So that evening, Rebbe Zera went to the Beis Medrash. You know, he's still a greener in Eretz Yisrael. He's not familiar with the customs of the place. So Amar Lon, Rabbanan ma bishmin hagadahacha. So Rebbe Zera said to the Chachamim, he's not upset. He's just puzzled. He says, what is this bad minhag that you people have in this place? De la achil barnash litra de kupara demachul echad kursam. That a person can't eat a piece of meat until he gets a slap on the face. So Amrin lei umahu dain. They said to him, what are you talking about? What minhag are you talking about? What person did this to you? So Amar Lon plan tabacha. He said, yeah, I went to the local butcher, Moshe's meats. And this is the way he treated me. So Shalchan boy mighty say. So the Chachamim were mortified, and so they said, we want to speak to this guy. Let's summon him and ask him to explain his behavior. Va'ashkachun arone nafka, and they found his casket, meaning that he had passed away. Apparently, this was divine retribution for having humiliated a sage, for having treated a sage with such disrespect. Now, remember, this was also part of the story that we had seen regarding the previous sage, Rav Kahana. When we learned the story about Rav Kahana, there too, he was being disgraced, and as a result of those scoffers disgracing him, and they said, well, what did you see when you had your afterlife experience? Remember that whole story? And then he got upset and he told them, oh, I heard that you're next, and so he ended up leaving Eretz Yisrael because he felt terrible that he was treating people this way. He doesn't want to be responsible for other people dying. So Amrin Lei, so the Chachamim said to Rebbe Zeira, Rebbe Kol Hachin, they said, Rebbe, is this how much the guy got you upset? Did he get you so upset that you caused him to die? So Amar Lon v'yesei alai delaka asas aluye. He says, no, I swear. V'yesei alai is a phrase of may I be punished if I am not telling you the truth. Meaning I declare to you, I swear to you, I was not upset with the guy. I was just puzzled that this is not an appropriate thing to do. Disabris the minhag again, because I thought that was the minhag, that anytime you buy a piece of meat, you get a slap in the face. Now, the Meforshim, one of the Meforshim I noticed explained that Chazal, there's a medrash that says that Chazal really wanted to prohibit wine and meat after the destruction of the temple, because they felt that people shouldn't be celebrating anything once the temple was destroyed. So Rebbe Zera thought maybe the guy is just, when anytime a person buys a piece of meat, like Zecher L'Chorban, give him a zetz, But he just felt it's still not an appropriate minhag. If a guy wants to self-inflict himself to remind himself of the Chorban, he can do that. But why should the butcher be? It's not nice. It's not bein adam lechavero. This is not the way people should behave to each other. So that's the reason why, he felt it was wrong, but he didn't take personal offense. I mean, he was a very humble person, and he felt if someone wants to disgrace me, that's their business. I'm not gonna get upset about it. In any event, it's interesting to see the contrast. Hashem punished the butcher for having disgraced the Talmud Chacham, but it wasn't because of Rabbi Ze'era's personal anger or his humiliation, like in the case of Rav Kahana, like we saw yesterday.
I mean, should the Talmud Chacham be worried that it's a disgrace to the Torah? Never mind his own personal disgrace. Should that be something?
Yeah, maybe. No, but that's what the Gemara is explaining over here, that Rabbi Ze'era didn't feel that he was being disgraced. He just thought that it was, if that's the minhag of the place, fine, but I don't think it's a
You can
correct
tell by
minhag.
his questions, he didn't think it was personal.
Yeah, he didn't take it personally. Yeah. Okay, Rabbi Yasa Katsalik Lahacha. It's another story about a rabbi from Bavel who made Aliyah, Azal Sapar, and Boy Mischi Ba'ahan Diamosin de Tiveria. So, it's not an easy trip when you're traveling from Bavel to Eretz Yisrael. It might take a couple of days. So he wanted to get a haircut, and then he wanted to go to one of the hot baths of Tiveria. Did we ever go to Chamei Tiveria?
No.
Yeah, I've been there as well.
Cool.
Yeah, hot springs. Tveria has hot springs. So if you're in this part of the world, you can go to Desert Hot Springs in California. If you're in Eretz Yisrael, they have hot springs in Tveria. They're fantastic, and people actually go for therapeutic reasons. So he felt that he could strengthen his body after the long journey by going to the Tveria hot springs. So Pagabe Chad Leitzan. So a certain scoffer, like what would you call it? A let's, not that. No, a clown, like a guy who just wants to make fun of people is a let's, okay? And v'yoyev le porkedal chad, and he gave him a zetz on the back of his neck, on his nape, okay? And v'omar le, and so the scoffer said to Rebbe Yasa, he says to him, you're going to Tveria, to the hot springs to strengthen your body. The zetz that I gave you on the back of your neck certainly helps to strengthen your flesh, harden it up, give you a nice little slap on the back that'll make you strong and hardy. But ad kedon unkase dahu gaver rafia, but the front of your neck is still weak, so you better go to the hot springs. Here you go, buddy. I strengthened the back of your neck, but the front of your neck still needs. You better go to the hot springs. Vahava arkona koyim doin achad listim, and it just so happened by coincidence that there was a court case that was presiding in that very same area where a judge was judging a robber, okay? And they were, I guess maybe in the town square near the hot springs of Tveria, they were, I guess, either punishing or restraining him so that he would confess to the crime. Va'azl kamle gachich kol kavle. And so the same guy who gave Rabbi Yasa the zetz on the back of on his back, went ahead in front of this robber to sort of gloat. Look at you, Amar le archona. So that while this is going on, the judge says to the robber, he says, "Man hu imach, who were your accomplices?" So Tala Enoye v'chama dehu gachich. So this robber looks up and he sees this guy making, look at you. So he goes and he says, Amar le ahon de gachich havaimi. See that guy who's making fun of me and laughing at me? He was my accomplice. So it's the same let's, the same guy that gave a zetz to Rabbi Yasa. He's now implicated because the robber doesn't like this guy. Nasbe v'dane va'odile al chad katil. And so the judge arrests him and says, fess up, tell us what you're guilty of. And he finally confesses that he had killed a person. This lets. So mi nafgun tarvaihon. So they're schlepping in chains both the robber and this let's who's now been convicted of murder. Tiin and tarte sherin. They both had chains wrapped around their necks. I guess like stocks or whatever you call them. Min da'avar Rebbe, like collars of chains. Min da'avar Rebbe Yasa mische, and it would just so happen that it was the same time that Rebbe Yasa was coming out of the hot springs of Tiberia, and he sees this let's being dragged to the execution block. So Amar Le, Hahu Unkisa Dahavarafia. So the let's sees Rebbe Yasa, the rabbi that he had given a zetz to, and he says, there really was a weak neck, but it wasn't your neck, it was my neck. Kavar Shansas, my neck has become strengthened as a result of these chains. In other words, now I realize I'm being punished for having treated you in this way. So Amar Le, Rabbi Yasa said back to him, Bish gada dahavu gavra. So Rabbi Yasa says to him very calmly, without any anger, he says, you must have really bad mazel. And what he means to say by that is that I was moichel you. Like, don't take it out on me. It's not because of me that you're being punished. I was moichel. So he says, V'lok siv, because it say in the pasuk, and it's really because of your own fault, that you're your own character that Hashem is punishing you, not because I implicated you in heaven, because va'ata al tislot satsu pen yechezku mosrechem. He says, the pasuk in Yeshaya says, do not be scoffers, lest the bonds that are tied around you will be strengthened. In other words, will get tighter. If you don't want the chains to get tighter around you, don't engage in scoffery and foolhardiness. So he says, in other words, you're getting exactly what you deserve, but it's not because of me. It's because you're just the guy who was misbehaving. So the Gemara now brings another drasha to explain what the punishment for late sanus is. Late sanus is it's not laziness, that's atzlanut. But late sanut is scoffery, making fun of things, being sarcastic and just.
Rabbi, what I don't understand about the story is, it seemed like he was just picked out. That he wasn't really guilty, or was he guilty?
No, he was actually guilty. He had actually killed somebody.
He really did.
But they forced a confession out of him, meaning that he would have gotten away with it had he not been arrested. But he got arrested because he was acting like a scoffer around this guy who was being judged, laughing and pointing at him. And he should have just kept his head low.
Laid low.
Yeah.
Don't you need two witnesses and a warning for a death sentence?
Probably you do, but this was not a Jewish based in. This was a court of law, probably under Roman authority. Yeah. So anyway, Rabbi Pinchas, Rabbi Yirmiyah b'shem Rabbi Shmuel bar Rabbi Yitzchak. So these sages all say, "Kasha hi haleit sanus," that scoffery is and making fun of others is really bad. Shetechilasa yisurin. He says, because the initial punishment for that is suffering, v'sofan kiloya, and the end punishment is utter destruction. Techilasa Yisurin. It starts off with suffering, dichsiv, because the beginning of that pasuk that we just quoted from Yeshaya is Ve'ata al tislot tzatzu pen yechezku mosurechem, that don't be scoffers, lest the bonds tighten around you. V'sofan keloya dichsiv, because at the end of the pasuk it says ki chala v'necheratza shamati, right? Because I have heard that there will be absolute destruction. Me'es Hashem Elokim tzivakos al kol haaretz, from the Lord God, the Lord of hosts, upon the earth. And he quotes in the footnote that Chazal are very machmir about people who are scoffers. Now, again, scoffery, if you're a comedian and you make people laugh when they're sad, that's a mitzvah. But it depends the nature of the scoffery. Scoffery is when you make people laugh at the expense of others. So if it's at the expense of others, you get punished for that. And making fun and not treating things seriously.
Where Don Rickles?
I was thinking, Don Rickles.
Yeah.
There's money on that.
So Don Rickles,
He lived a long life.
he lived a long life. The truth is, the reason why I think he was a righteous man, Don Rickles, is because he always made people laugh at themselves. In other words, it was never a mean-spirited humor. He always at the end said, no, I really think you're a good guy. And
People
always,
do when they win.
yeah, everyone knew that they were going to get insulted, and it was funny, and it was joyful. So he just brings that people who are scoffers will not receive. And also scoffery, what does it lead to? It leads to a rejection of Hashem. If it's done in a way where people don't take anything seriously, people don't take life seriously.
Do you think today's comedians, especially in the political community, do they cross over the line? Or do you think they're staying with that?
I don't know. I'm not going to pass judgment on anybody, but here's the thing: is that people are very sensitive. People are more sensitive today than they used to be. Don Rickles could not get away with what he used to get away with, making fun of black people and Hispanics and Chinese,
What about Archie Bunker?
Yeah.
Now, my question, the fact that all the stories happen in Eretz Yisrael, the rabbi's trying to give us a message on specifically Eretz Yisrael at that time?
It's a good question, Steve, but I'm also thinking to myself, this text is being written in Eretz Yisrael. So the person who's recording this is saying what happened locally. Can I say that things were better in Bavel? Not necessarily. Every culture has its own problems. But I think what I'm taking from it is, a lot of times you go to a place where people don't appreciate who you are because you're either new there or people just haven't heard of you or whatever. And sometimes you have to go through humiliating experiences because you may come from, in Thornhill, they treat you with kavod, they give you shishi, every Shabbos. But then when you go to the other place, who are you? You're a nobody, you're a bozo, and so you got to learn how to accept it. And the lesson, I think, is also, like from the last couple of stories, don't take it personally. A tzaddik does not allow these things to upset him. And that's an important lesson also, right?
Certainly, yes. Rabbi, you mentioned before about who was it a Tanner or Mara who said that they wanted to cut out wine, and I can't.
There's a medrash that says that when the temple was destroyed, the rabbis were tempted to ban meat and wine. But they said, we can't do it because the congregation won't be able, it's too much. They won't be able to abide.
With the music, they don't.
There's a long-standing takana that in Yerushalmi, you're not supposed to have a band. So that's why when people get married, they get married outside of Yerushalayim. Right on the outskirts of Jerusalem, you can have music. But in the city proper, there's a tradition not to have music. I don't know that everyone abides by it, because you can go to Ben Yehuda and listen to music being played. It's just, I guess, for weddings, from weddings, they only have drummers. Yeah. I've been to plenty of weddings like that in my time. Yeah. I'd rather go to the outskirts of Yerushalayim.
And bars don't count.
Okay, let us go on. Now we have the Mishnah, the next Mishnah. Some of it we had talked about this before, about the Chassan. We said Rabban Gamliel. There were two things that, a number of things that Rabban Gamliel did when the two Mishnayos ago, we saw that when Rabban Gamliel got married, even though the practice was that a chassan is exempt from Kriya Shema, Rabban Gamliel said, I'm going to recite Kriya Shema anyway, because no one can stop me from accepting the yoke of heaven upon myself.
Because you don't say it, or if you don't say it, you're off.
We said you're exempt.
You're exempt.
What this mission is going to clarify is that acceptable? Is that something that a person must do? Like he's not allowed to say Kriya Shema the night of his wedding? Or let's say he wants to be like Rabban Gamliel. Could he say, I want to be Machmir? So the Mishnah over here deals with that issue. Chasan imrotze. So we're on at the Mishnah on Lamed Aleph, Amid Aleph. By the way, we're almost done with the second parak, which is good news. So Chasan imrotze likros es Shemaya balayla harishon korei. That if a Chasan wishes to recite Kriya Shema on the first night, he can do that. He's perfectly within his rights. He's exempt because we assume that he's nervous and he's not able to, focus on the words he's saying. But if he wants to, he could. So Rabban Shimon Gamliel Oimer lo kol harotze litol es Hashem yitol. And Rabban Shimon ben Gamliel, the son of Rabban Gamliel, who's the origin of the story of the great rabbi who did recite Kriya Shema the night of his wedding, he said no. He says not everyone who wants to take the name of God and be machmir on himself has a right to do that, because if you're not assumed to be a great righteous or great Talmud Chacham, you shouldn't be doing that. If you take a look at footnote number 10, so he says, L'das Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, kasher adam koreh shema b'leil chatunato, hu mar l'chol shu yachol lechabein libo, that basically what you're doing when you recite Kriya Shema the night of your wedding, you're displaying, I can handle this. Like I'm so frum, I can do this. And it says v'zu yuhara, and that's a form of arrogance. It's a form of just saying, I'm on the madrega, that even though everyone else is pater, I can do this. The same language is used, by the way, for, let's say, we know that women are exempt from tzitzis. Is a woman allowed to wear tzitzis? Yes, but it's a sign of ego, a sign of arrogance. Like, because when a woman puts on tzitzis, she's basically saying, I've done all the mitzvahs that I'm obligated to do as a woman. I need to do more, right? So it's almost, so that's why, even though technically a woman is allowed to wear tzitzis, if she does so,
So anything that a woman is putter, because she does it, is that considered that she?
No, it's not. It's not for all mitzvahs. Like, for example, she's shofar and sukkah is a mitzvah saseh shezman grama, but women are machmir to fulfill those mitzvahs in many instances. So especially shofar. Women are technically putter from shofar, but we know that all women want to hear the shofar because of its positive effects, its spiritual effects. So it's not really true that you can say this about all mitzvahs. They say it specifically about tzitzis, however. But va'od shemityaher bekach shemareh she'inei yachol levatel kriya shema v'kabolas u'malchus shamayim afilu pamachas. And you're so frum, you're sort of displaying, I want to be like Rabban Gamliel, that I don't want to take a break from accepting the yoke of heaven even for one evening. And therefore, that's the attitude. Omnam Tanakama sover kol adam rashai likros shema. He says, but the Tanakama is of the opinion, no, anyone can do this if you want to be miracle gesundheit hate. Because we're not worried that you're going to look like a big shot. Bibavli mavur shebederach klal av Tanakama choshesh liyu barak b'mikrez zesover shin lachshosh lakach. He says the Bavli explains that the reason why the Tanakama feels it's okay is because even though normally you shouldn't show off that you're like so frum, but in this situation you're not acting any differently from anybody else. just like everybody else is davening Ma'ariv and reciting Kriya Shema. So for you to chassan to join in is not such a sign of egotism. The machlokas zusha b'mishnasenu. Now, as far as how we paskin, Harifa Harambam, both paskin pasku ketana kama shekol echad rashai lahachmir b'likros, that anyone can go ahead and recite Kriya Shema, even the chassan. Ulam rach b'harash pasku krab Shem and Gamliel shelo kol echad rashai lahachmir Rabbeinu Chananel. They hold that no, you don't have a right to be machmir if you're just a regular Joe. Because v'toisves sha'af l'das l'deya sha'halachim Shem and Gamliel mikol makom din zanem arak bizmanam. And but Tosfos qualifies this, and this is brought by the poskim. This whole discussion is only back then. Why? Ach kiyom shebnei adam memela ina mechavnim libam karoi b'kriya shema chasan hakaroi shema ino nira k'mizyar. Today, no one has proper kavanah when they're reciting Kriya Shema. It's like very hard to muster that level of concentration, and therefore today any chasan is permitted to recite Kriya Shema. And that's how we paskin. Shom shemistama hu kari l'lo kavana gemura kederch rov b'nei adam. And va'adarabba chasan she'eno kari Shema nira k'misyayir. He says, if anything, the chasan who refuses to recite Kriya Shema is the one who's looking too frum and too arrogant. Why? Because you're sort of saying that every other night that I recite Kriya Shema, I have so much kavana that only tonight I can't have proper kavana. Who do you think you are? Yeah, I saw you last night before your wedding. You were looking at your smartphone, you know, or whatever, you know. So
I was thinking something else the night before.
The night before, maybe you were out at a bachelor party, whatever, right? In
I
other
was
words,
thinking.
yeah, okay, whatever. But the point is that today this halacha is not halacha lamaisa. Today, the minhag is that even a chassan on the night of his wedding should recite Kriya Shema. Okay, so let's start the Gemara. The Gemara is now going to give us a rule, a general rule that is the source for Rabbi Shimon Gamliel's idea of lo kol harotza litol es Hashem itol. Not everyone who wants to take God's name, invoke God's name, has a right to do so. Tani kol davar shehu shel tsar, that any matter that involves pain, meaning that the practice itself is a painful practice. So, for example, Talmidei Chachamim fast when there's a drought. So usually what they do is there's a progression. When this is from the Gemara in Maseches Tainis, the Mishnah says that if there's initially a drought, then only the Talmidei Chachamim in the community fast. And if the drought continues, then they institute a communal fast. Okay? So kol harotze la'asos atzmo yachid osa. If a person wants to make himself like one of those Talmidei Chachamim and fast, even though they haven't yet decreed a public fast, you have a right to do that. That's not considered to be an act of arrogance because it's not something that you're doing so publicly. And on Tisha B'Av also, there's a custom that a Talmid Chacham is not supposed to work. And if you want to make yourself like a Talmid Chacham and not work on Tisha B'Av, you have a right to do so. So Talmid Chacham oiseh v'tavo lo bracha. And not only are you doing the right thing, but a blessing should befall you. So that's only when it comes to things where they involve self-deprivation, where you're doing things to be machmir on yourself, to treat yourself like a Talmid Chacham, but in doing so, you are depriving yourself of pleasure. So that's perfectly legitimate. It's perfectly fine. It doesn't look like arrogance at all. But v'chol davar shehu shel shevach, lo kol harotz alasos atzmo yachid osa. But anything that involves prestige, meaning that you're not getting any pain from being machmir in this practice. So let's say like wearing a special frock or wearing a Hamburg or something like that, like you make yourself look like a Rosh Yeshiva, then lo kol harotz alasos atzmo yachid osa. Not everyone who wants to do that should be able to do that. So we're going to continue this Gemara Mirz Hashem tomorrow, and we'll see the parameters of when a person can make himself